Imagine waking up tomorrow and realizing there are no countries. No flags, no borders, no passports. Sounds wild, right? But what even is a nation? Why do we divide ourselves into these invisible lines? A nation isn't just a chunk of land. It's an idea. A story people agree to believe in. A nation means people who feel connected by language, culture, or shared history. Sometimes even when they've never met. But nations didn't always exist the way we know them. In ancient times, the world was carved into kingdoms, empires, and tribes. In ancient India, territories called Janapadas formed some of the earliest political communities. These were places where people shared customs, beliefs, and fought for survival together. But the idea of fixed, sovereign nations like we have now is surprisingly modern. One of the biggest turning points? The Treaty of Westphalia in 1648. This deal ended bloody wars in Europe and introduced the radical idea of fixed borders and sovereign states. Before this, rulers fought endlessly over who controlled what land, often ignoring what the people wanted. The Treaty of Westphalia made it clear. You rule your land, I rule mine. No interfering. That might sound obvious today, but it was revolutionary back then. Over the centuries, more communities began identifying as nations, not just empires or tribes. Nations gave people a sense of belonging, pride, and a reason to fight or defend an identity. But it wasn't always peaceful. Wars have been fought for centuries over where one nation ends and another begins. Fast forward to the 20th century, when two world wars tore global maps apart. After World War II, dozens of new nations were born as old empires collapsed. Colonies demanded independence, and countries like India, Pakistan, and Ghana claimed their right to exist. In fact, more than half of today's nations didn't even exist before 1945. So, if nations are so recent, why do people get so attached to them? Because a nation isn't just about land. It's about who we are and where we belong. People feel safer, prouder, and stronger when part of something bigger than themselves. National identity helps people find meaning, even if it's an idea made up by humans. Sometimes this unity can bring peace. Other times it causes conflict when identities clash. Nations often tell heroic origin stories, whether fact or myth, to unite people. These stories give people pride, belonging, and a reason to defend their homeland. But behind the borders, most people care about simple things: family, safety, a good life. The borders and flags are symbols, while the people and culture are the heart of it all. Nations exist because humans crave belonging and structure, but also because history shaped them that way. Think about it. Borders aren't drawn by nature. They're drawn by people, often after wars or deals. Mountains, rivers, and oceans sometimes act as natural borders, but not always. Many modern borders make no sense, slicing through tribes, languages, and family. This led to tensions in places like Africa and the Middle East after colonialism ended. Post-WW2, the United Nations tried to bring some order to the chaos of new nations forming. The number of sovereign nations exploded from about 70 to nearly 200 in just 80 years. Some new nations succeeded, others struggled with poverty, corruption, or civil war. Today, debates still rage over who qualifies as a nation. A nation needs recognition from other nations, but also a people who believe in it. It's a weird, complicated system. But for now, it's how humans manage the planet. Some people dream of a future without nations, just one big global community. Others believe nations protect diversity, letting different cultures thrive safely. Both ideas have risks. Too many divisions lead to war, but too little identity feels empty. So, nations walk a tightrope between unity, identity, and peace. Some nations are ancient. Others were born yesterday. And each tells its people, you belong here. Borders might be lines on a map, but what they represent shapes how people live and dream. From ancient Janapadas to modern superpowers, nations have evolved but never vanished. Even today, new nations emerge when people demand to be recognized as a community. The nation-state idea spread so successfully, it's now the standard everywhere on Earth. Whether you're in a giant country or a tiny island, your nation shapes your identity every day. Even your passport, anthem, or favorite sports team are ways nations leave their mark on daily life. Wars, borders, and alliances may change, but the idea of belonging to a nation survives. It's one of humanity's most powerful inventions. Invisible, yet shaping everything around us. That's why some people cling to national pride, while others criticize it for dividing humanity. But no matter which side you're on, you can't deny nations have shaped our history. And perhaps in the future, humanity will find a better way to balance unity and identity. Until then, nations will keep rising, merging, splitting, and evolving. Just like people. The real question isn't whether nations are good or bad, but whether they can evolve with us. Maybe one day, our grandchildren will ask, "What's a nation?" just like we ask about empires. Because in the end, a nation is just a story, and stories can always be rewritten. Long before nations, people organized in tribes and clans for survival and security. These groups spoke the same language, shared customs, and protected each other from outsiders. As populations grew, clans formed villages, then city-states, then ancient kingdoms. In India, early Janapadas were some of the world's first named territories. These Janapadas had armies, taxes, and leaders, but identities still rested on tribe and land. The concept of national borders as legal, permanent lines didn't exist yet. Power often belonged to whoever had the strongest sword, not to the people inside a land. Centuries later, empires rose. From Rome to Persia to the Mauryan dynasty. Empires weren't nations. They ruled people of many languages, faiths, and customs under one banner. True nations only began forming when people demanded rulers represent their identity, not just control land. In Europe, that shift exploded after the Treaty of Westphalia in 1648. The treaty ended endless religious wars by saying each ruler controlled their own land. No outside meddling. It was a game changer. For the first time, borders were legal, not just enforced by armies. Over time, people living inside those borders started calling themselves a nation. National pride gave people a reason to defend land and culture, not just obey a ruler. The idea spread fast. Revolutions in America and France proved people could create nations of their own. By the 19th century, national identity fueled rebellions and independence movements across the world. Suddenly, being part of a nation was about language, history, and pride, not just kings and borders. The 20th century took this to the extreme, as nationalism sparked both pride and deadly wars. World War I and II redrew maps again, proving how fragile national borders really are. After World War II, entire empires crumbled as colonized people demanded their own nations. Between 1945 and 1975, over 80 new countries appeared on the world map. India, Ghana, and dozens more became independent nations with borders, anthems, and identity. Some borders were drawn peacefully. Others caused bloody conflicts that still echo today. The United Nations was formed to help manage these rising nations and avoid more global wars. But defining a nation isn't as simple as drawing a line on a map. Many modern borders split ethnic groups, languages, and even families apart. That's why nationalism today can be both unifying and dangerously divisive. Some groups are still fighting for their own nation. Places like Palestine, Taiwan, and Kurdistan. And new micronations even appear today, with people claiming tiny plots as independent countries. So what actually makes a nation real? Is it borders, a flag, or the people who believe in it? Most experts agree it's the people's belief that turns land into a nation. Without that shared story, a flag is just cloth, and a border is just a line. That's why some nations disappear, while others last for centuries. The strongest nations aren't always the richest or biggest. They're the ones people truly believe in. In today's world, nations also exist digitally, with diasporas connecting online across continents. Culture, language, and history travel beyond borders, keeping national identity alive abroad. Nations can outlive borders if their culture and story are kept alive. At the same time, nations can vanish quickly if people stop believing in them. That's why, even today, the definition of a nation is still debated in courts, parliaments, and homes. Some claim nations are just illusions, created by politicians and elites to control people. Others say nations are natural because humans always form groups to feel secure. The truth is, both ideas have some weight. Nations are imagined, but powerful. Today, the idea of what makes a nation is shifting again in a connected, digital world. Some experts argue future nations may not be based on land, but on shared values or virtual borders. But for now, territory, people, culture, and recognition by other nations still decide nationhood. Even sports can be a battleground for national identity, pride, and rivalry. When a small nation beats a global superpower in football or cricket, it feels like a victory for identity. Music, food, and cinema also carry national pride across the world. Sometimes, even when a nation disappears politically, its culture survives for centuries. That's why we still talk about ancient Rome, Persia, or the Mauryas long after they vanished. Because a nation isn't just political. It's emotional, cultural, and often nostalgic. Some new nations struggle to build that emotional connection from scratch. It takes stories, heroes, and shared struggles to give a nation meaning. That's why history books in every nation often tell their own version of past events. National identity can unite millions, or become a dangerous excuse for conflict. It can inspire people to build, defend, and sacrifice for future generations. And yet, those very identities are constantly reshaped by migration, war, and cultural exchange. Nations aren't static. They evolve, sometimes peacefully, sometimes painfully. The world's political map today looks nothing like it did even 100 years ago. In some parts of the world, new nations still fight for recognition every year. For these people, nationhood means dignity, identity, and control over their future. Even tiny island nations with just a few thousand citizens fiercely protect their sovereignty. Meanwhile, superpowers defend their status with military might, diplomacy, and global influence. The irony is, both powerful empires and tiny islands claim the same basic right: self-rule. That's why international law struggles to define what truly counts as a legitimate nation. Some places meet every requirement but lack recognition, while others exist by tradition alone. That's why debates over what is a nation aren't just academic. They decide lives. In times of war or economic collapse, that national identity becomes people's anchor and shield. At the same time, hyper-nationalism can isolate and divide, turning patriotism into prejudice. Nations are powerful because they blend geography, history, and human emotion into one story. That story is retold every Independence Day, election, and even football match. In modern times, some thinkers question if the nation-state model will survive the next century. Climate change, mass migration, and the internet are testing the limits of national borders. Some predict a future of global communities based on values, not just territory. Others warn the death of nations could unleash chaos as power vacuums appear. History shows both unity and division follow when old empires fall or merge. The challenge isn't whether nations exist. It's whether they can adapt to new realities. Some small nations are already redefining identity beyond borders, with global citizens connected by culture. In a digital world, the next nation might not be a place, but a community of ideas. But no matter what form it takes, humans will always crave belonging. Whether it's a village, a country, or a global alliance, identity matters. That identity shapes how we treat neighbors, strangers, and even ourselves. The concept of nationhood is powerful because it turns millions of strangers into a family. It gives people a sense of meaning, history, and a home in an unpredictable world. From ancient Janapadas to digital micronations, humanity keeps reinventing what nations mean. Because deep down, people want to feel like they belong to something bigger than themselves. Nations survive because they evolve, absorbing new ideas, stories, and generations.
And even when borders disappear, memories of nations live on, in culture, art, and ancestry.
So in the end, a nation isn't just land. It's a living story we keep telling. And like every story, it changes with each generation that inherits it. The stories of our nations shape how we understand history and imagine the future. From cave paintings to TikTok reels, people have always told stories about belonging. Maybe one day future humans will look back at today's nations the way we view ancient empires. Or perhaps they'll build new kinds of nations, not by borders but by shared hopes. Because whether on Earth, Mars, or online, humans will always create communities to call home. The urge to belong, to defend what we love, and to name the world around us never fades. And that's why the idea of nations, for all its flaws, endures to this day. It's not perfect. It's not forever. But for now, it's how we live together. And maybe, one day, we'll rewrite the map once more. New stories, new nations, new ways to belong. Because as long as humans exist, we'll keep drawing lines, planting flags and telling stories. Some of those lines will bring peace, others, war. But no matter the outcome, we'll always crave something bigger than ourselves. The nation is one of humanity's most powerful, flawed, and fascinating inventions. And like all inventions, it's up to us to decide how we use it. Will we build walls or bridges? Will we divide or unite? History suggests we'll do both, again and again, because nations, like people, rise and fall. But stories last forever. Every borderline was once an idea. Every anthem a poem. Every flag a story someone dared to tell. And somewhere someone is doing it again right now. Because the world isn't finished. It never was. Nations may rise, fall, merge or vanish. But the need to belong never disappears. That's the heart of every nation. Ancient or modern. It's not perfect, it never was, but it's human. And so long as there are people, there will be nations, or whatever comes next. The question isn't whether nations exist, it's whether we'll write better stories next time. Because this map, our world, is still being drawn, and you, whether you know it or not, are part of it. Every time you choose a team, a flag, or a song, you're adding a thread to the story. And every time you question it, challenge it, or rewrite it, you shape the future. Nations are old stories, but new storytellers arrive with every generation. Maybe that's the most human thing of all. To draw lines, to erase them, to tell stories, to belong. And to believe that somehow, somewhere, we can keep getting better. So what is a nation? It's the story we tell to make sense of ourselves. The question is, what story will we choose to tell next? Thanks for watching Mini Docs. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe for more what if, history, and deep dive videos every week. See you in the next one.